CSS measurement units are used to specify the dimensions, spacing, and sizing of elements. These units determine the width, height, margin, padding, font sizes, and more, allowing for precise control over the layout and appearance. All right, and then we have two types of CSS units. We have the absolute unit and relative unit. For absolute units are fixed in size and do not change based on other elements or the viewport. So when you set, for instance, or pixels, that's px, is a good example of absolute unit. All right, and if you set, for instance, 20% of font size on an element, that element will remain 20% across all screen size because it is absolute and then it remains fixed. Then the absolute units are suitable for print styles or fixed width designs, but not ideal for responsive layouts. So if you are considering building a responsive layout, do not use absolute units. On the other hand, we have relative units, relative to other measurements like the parent element size or the viewport. So relative units enable flexible and adaptive designs that can adjust based on screen size or user preferences. So some examples of absolute units are pixels. Pixel stands for picture element. All right, so that is the PX in short. So it is the most commonly used unit. That's the most commonly used absolute unit in CSS. It represents a single dot on the screen, providing precise control over element size. So example, width is set to 200 pixels. Now the remaining three here, the centimeters, inches, and the points, we don't use it. Like we rarely use them actually. In fact, I've not used it all my years of development. I use pixels when it comes to absolute units. All right, but then just know that we have the centimeters, we have the inches, the centimeters as cm. We also have the millimeters mm, inches, and then we have points. All right. Then for relative units, we have percentages. Okay, so we use this symbol, and it is relative to the parent element size. So a good example is width set to 50%. So the width we occupy half the parent width, making it ideal for fluid layout. We have the EM and REM, EM and the REM, and then we also have the viewport unit. So quickly, let's see the practical aspect of that. So I have created this index.html document and then the styles.css. So let's look at the body section of the elements, or the HTML part basically. In the body elements, we have the header, which has h1 as the child element. Okay, and then we have three sections: section 1, section 2, section 3. And if you look at each section has a class attribute. The first section has a class attribute of container 1, the second one has a class attribute of container 2, and the third section has a class attribute of container 3, right? And then in the first section, we have this content here, parent container 1, that's percentages, right? And then it has a div element with a class attribute of child 1, that's child element 1. Then for this second section, it has a div with a class attribute of child 2, that's child element 2, and the third one has a class attribute of child 3, that's child element 3. Let's load the document. If I load the document now, so here is the document basically. So let's look at the styles of CSS. Now I have used this asterisk, and this asterisk means universal selector, which selects all the elements in our HTML document. So in the declaration block, right, we have three CSS properties: margin, padding, and box sizing, right? So what this means is that all the elements we have in our HTML document, right, if we have some default margin and padding, we don't want it. So we want to set all the default margin and padding to 0. So this is what the first two CSS style rules implies. Then this third one, I have explained this box sizing in the episode of CSS box model, right? I mentioned that every element can be represented as a rectangular box, all right? And then the box sizing has two values. The default value is content box, exactly. Now, this is not meant to be content box, supposed to be border box, basically. Because this content box means that if I set width on an element, right, I will have to add up the padding and margin to get the full width of the element. But if box sizing is set to border box, right, whatever width I set on that element is the full width of the element. All right. Don't worry, we're going to do this over and over. I mean, we'll be saying this a lot, this as a universal selector, and then margin zero, padding zero, box sizing, border box a lot. And I believe with time you will understand why we always write this at the beginning of our CSS style. All right, and then the section basically. Now we have three section elements in our HTML document. 1, 2, 3. So since we are using the type selector, right, it means that whatever style rules we specify in the declaration block will affect all the section elements of our HTML document. So if you look at the web again, look at the web page, we have three sections, 1, 2, 3. And based on the style rules, right, we said that each section should have border of 1 pixel solid black, right? That is why we have this border around each of the section, right? And then we have margin 20 pixel 0. So in box model, in CSS box model episode, I mentioned that if you pass two values, right, to margin property, this margin here is a shorthand property. This two value means that 20 goes to the top and bottom, and then 0 goes to the left and right. And then we set the height to 100 pixels. So if I go back, we have this basically. So margin is the space around the element, right? The space around the element. If I comment out this margin, for instance, save, and then head back to the browser and refresh. As you can see, there is no space, there is no surrounding space basically, and it's kind of compressed all the elements together. So there is no breathing space between the three boxes and even the heading that we have at the top. So to create space, we have to set margins to the top and bottom, as the case may be, basically. So at this point, I actually want to create margins to the top and margin to the bottom. That is why I have this 20 pixels and then 0, because I don't want margin to the left and right. I only want margin to the top and bottom. All right, so I mean, we haven't really started anything about CSS measurement units. I only explain what this HTML and CSS styles is all about at this point. So right now, let's look at the first one, pixels. Yeah, so pixels is an example of absolute unit in CSS. All right, pixels. Now I'm going to use this H1, right, to explain pixels. Now back to styles.css. After this section, I will select this H1 element and then set the font size to, say for instance, let's say 75 pixels. 75 pixels. Save and then back to the browser. Oh, please, before that, let's ensure that our margin is actually implemented on the web. So good. So we have the margin now, space. So there's space between the three boxes. So I'm going to uncomment this back. We actually want to increase the font size of the H1 element. Back to the browser. Then if I refresh, good. So as you can see, I have resized the font size of the H1 CSS measurement unit. And now what this means is that if I check the developer tool, for instance, now, so the shortcut I use right now is Ctrl+Shift+I, or you can right click. So if I take this back, for instance, so I can right click and then say inspect. So if I go for inspect, it will still open up the developer for me basically. So as you can see, this H1 is 75 pixels. That's the font size. Let's look at that. Let's make sure that we select the H1. I'm going to, so I will get this pointer right here. Okay, and then ensure that the H1 is selected. So H1 is selected right now. And if you look at styles, if you switch the tab to styles and check the font size is 75 pixels. So what this means is that across different screen size, this H1 will remain 75. It's not going to change. So this may actually affect the responsiveness of our site. Now, look at these dimensions here. You can use this to switch or to actually check different screen size. Now for iPhones, if I select this is how this font size will look like on iPhone. On iPhone XR, this is how it will look like on iPhone XR. As you can see, it's not responsive at all. So there is an overflow at this point along the horizontal axis. So we can switch this again to check iPhone 12 Pro. So this is how it will look like on iPhone 12. So again, on iPhone 14 Pro Max, this is how it will look like. And if you go for Samsung, so this is the screen size for Samsung. I mean, you can play around with this device or the dimension size that we have here, and you can as well use this tab at the top. So this one is for laptop. So laptop, which has a width of 1024 pixels. So this is how we create responsive designs. All right. So this measurement we just look at right now is pixels, and what this means that whatever unit you set, okay, on the pixel or as a pixels, right, will remain the same across screen size. It doesn't change, it doesn't adjust automatically, except you change the value. So the next one, which is the relative unit, the second type, the relative type of CSS measurement units. The first one I want us to look at is percentage. So first, I'm going to close up this developer tool. I will close developer tool. So again, from the slide, percentage, are you taking time? So percentage is right relative to the parent element size, relative to the parent element size. So I will take it back to the index.html. Now let's take a look at the first section here. The section with the class attributes of container1, right? Now, if I set the width of this div, now we all agree that div here is the child element of this section right now, the section with the class attributes of container1, right? Now if I set the width of this div to 50%, right? Now this div is going to take half of the parent element being this section with the class of container1. So let's try it. So first I will target this div, that's child1, which is a class. So in my styles.css, so child1 is the class, and to select class in CSS, we use the dot operator, right? Followed by the class name. So the class name is child1, and then our declaration block. So the first thing I would like to do is to set the background so that we can see what is going on. So I will set the background color to maybe green. Save this, then I will head back to the browser, measurements, then refresh. Great. So it is this element right here, child element 1. So we want, if you want this child element, right, to take half of the width of its parent element, that is this first section with this border, with this black border, right? So we can actually set the width of this element, right, to 50%. So if I say width 50%, save, and then refresh. So you see, now we have resized the width of the child element to take half of its parent element size. All right. Again, if I open up the developer tool by right clicking, or you can use Control Shift I. Control Shift I will open up the developer tool on Windows basically. Now if I resize the screen, right, as you can see, the element is adjusting based on the screen size. You can see it, right? So it doesn't matter what the screen size is, as long as you set the width of that element to percentage, right? It will ensure that it readjusts itself to take half of whatever size the container is. So the container at this point is this size, and the more I shrink the screen, right, the child element will readjust itself to take half of the parent element. So this is a perfect example of percentage or relative unit in CSS. So again, if I switch this to, let's say, iPhone 14 Pro Max, so you see iPhone 14 Pro Max, this is the size, and then we have the child element, which has half of the parent width. So I will close this up again. The next one is EM. Let's look at EM. EM, great. So EM and REM. So first, EM relative to the font size of the element's parent. Relative to the font size of the element's parent. So if the parent's font size is 16 pixels, right, then EM would be equal 32 pixels. So which means if you set the font size of the parent 16 pixels, right, and then if any of the child elements has let's say for instance font size to 2 EM, now the 2 EM is going to be 32 pixels because it's going to times it by the actual font size of the parent element. Now to understand this, I will take it back to our code. Don't worry, it might sound difficult, but I mean, with time and if you start using it, you're going to understand how it works. So I'm going to use the second section this time around. The second section, right? But first, I would like to set the elements. Okay, it doesn't matter anyways. I will take it back to index of styles.css rather, and then that's container 2, right? Yeah, container 2. That's second section. Yes. So second section, container 2, and then we have child 2. So styles.css. So I will say container 2, right? Now I would like to set the font size container 2 to 10 pixels, right? 10 pixels. So let's head back to the browser. Then on our web page, so this is container 2, right? Parent container 2 EM, right? Then child element 2. So if I refresh, so look at this here, the font size has reduced, and this is as a result of inheritance. Remember, we have inheritance in CSS. So the child element was able to inherit the font size of the parent element, which makes it 10 pixels, right? Now, if you inspect the child element 2 right now in our developer 2, I will right click on child element and then select inspect. It's loading. Come on. Inspect. Okay, great. Inspect. So style. No, that's not what I want. So anyways, I'm just going to select it right away. Or from here, so the section with the class name of container 2, right? So I want to select the div, that's child 2. Exactly. Now, if you look at it here, inherited from section with the class name of container 2, the font size. So font size is 10 pixels, right? Font size is 10 pixels. Now, if I head back to the browser and say child 2, so which is this div here, div child 2, right? If I set the font size to 2 EM, right? 2 EM. So this means that this font size now is 20 pixels. And how do I know? So how EM works is that it's going to multiply whatever value of EM it is times the font size of the parent element. The parent element of this child 2 is container 2, right? And then it has its font size set to 10 pixels. So which means that the actual value of this font size is 2 EM. So I'm going to create a comment here. There's going to be, oh no, that's not what I want. So I'm just going to do that manually. Great. So right here, I'm going to write a comment. So the font size now is going to be 2 times 20, oh, sorry, 10, which will give us 20 pixels basically. So 2 here is this 2em, and then 10 is the actual font size of the container font size, right? Of the container basically, and then which gives us 20 pixels. So let's confirm that. So first, I'm going to close up the developer tool so that we can see it. So is this child element 2? Now if I refresh, you can see only the child element increase in size. Now, we mentioned that the font size is not 20 pixels. Let's check the developer tool if really this element has font size of 20 pixels. So I'm going to inspect this. So the div element is selected. Now let's check. So the font size is 2em. 2em. Now to see the 20 pixels, you have to switch the tab to computed. So from styles to computed. So I will select computed. Now look at the computed styles. If you look at the font size is what? 20 pixels. So which means if I go back to the code and then change this to let's say 2 or 3em. 3em, it means that the font size is 30 pixels. That is 3 times 10. 3 times whatever the font size of the parent is. So if I change the font size of the parent to 15 pixels, so it means that the font size of the child element now is 3 times 15. And I think that's going to be 45, right? 45 pixels. So if I save this, head back to the browser, and then refresh. So you see it has increased. Now let's confirm the font size. Font size is now 45 pixels. So this is how EM works in the CSS. So we use this to create responsive design in our application or in our web app. I'm going to close this up again. So even if you set, so let me correct this now. So this is going to be 3 times 3 times 10 times 15 because we have changed the font size now of the parent element to 15. So it's going to be 3 times 15, and this will give us 45. So in actual sense, the font size is 45 pixels. All right. So let's look at the third one, which is rem. So rem works with root elements. Let's take it back to the slide. So rem is relative to the root element font size, and the root element is the HTML element. I've mentioned that. I think one of the first few episodes we had, I mentioned that the root element of every HTML document is the HTML element. Right. So which means whatever font size you set on the HTML element, right, will determine the size of this rem. So with rem, you have more predictable for consistent scaling across the entire page. So for example, if font size is 1.5 rem, right, and if the root font size is 16 pixels, then 1.5 rem is equals to 25 pixels. So if you open up your calculator, right, so if you have a calculator there and then you calculate 16 times 1.5, it will give you 25 pixels. All right, so let's try that. I will take this back to my code. So to the document now, I've not been writing comments since. So I would say this H1 absolute, oh my god, absolute unit, which is pixels as a picture element. And then for this, we have relative units as percentage, right? Percentage. Please just stick around, right? Or it might look somehow difficult right now. Just as I've mentioned, if you look at this a few more times, you understand what is going on basically. So we have the EM, the M. Now let's look at the rem. Another relative unit, which is the rem, or the root element, rem. So from the slide, we mentioned that it works with the root element. The root element is HTML, right? So after our universal selector, let's set the font size. Now, by default, the font size is 16 pixels actually. So let's still leave it at 16 pixels. 16 pixels. Good. 16 pixels. And if I take it back to the web page and refresh, so you see it doesn't change much because I mentioned that that's the default, right? The default font size of our web page is 16 pixels. So great. What I'm going to do is we need the third one. That's the third section. So section with the class name of container tree, and it has the div elements with class name of div child elements with class name of child 3, right? Then back to styles.css. What I'm going to do is if I set container 3, for instance, container 3 font size to 1 rem. This doesn't change anything basically. 1 rem, because 1 rem is going to be 1 times whatever font size our HTML element has. So 1 times 16 will still give us 16 basically. So which means this is still 16 pixels. So this 1 rem is equivalent to 16 pixels because the calculation is going to be 1 times the font size of the root element, and the root element, which is our HTML selector here, it has a font size of 16 pixels. So 1 times the font size 16. So this is 16 pixels. If I take it back to the browser and refresh, it's not going to change anything in this container. So refresh, it doesn't change anything. Now, if I set this to 2 rem, right? Or let me leave this one. Let me leave this basically because it is the container basically. Now I will select the child element, which is child 3, right? And set the font size. The font size to 2 rem. So this 2 rem means I don't want to comment the entire code, so I'll do that manually. So the 2 rem means 2 times the font size of the root element, and the root element is 16 pixels. So 2 times 16, this will give us 32 pixels basically. So it means that the child element, right, or this selector here, if we take it back to the document, HTML document, is this div right here. So child element 3, it has a class name of child 3, and then in styles.css, font size is set to 2 rem, right? So 2 times 16 will give us 32 pixels. So the font size of this element, if we convert to pixels, it will give us 32. So let's take a look at this. So this should increase. If I refresh, you see the child element has increased. So let's confirm that in our developer tool. So right click on the element and then select inspect. So also confirm that the actual element is selected. So the div with the class name of child 3 is selected. And let's start from the styles. So from the styles, we have the font size set to 2 rem, right? Obviously, that is what we have in our code, right? 2 rem. So let's now see the conversion to rem. So back to the browser. So to see that, you have to go to computed. So the computed styles, the font size now is what? 32 pixels. So this is how it is being calculated. But the only difference is that the rem will be there for responsive design, but behind the scene it will be computed to pixels. All right. And then lastly, we have the VH and the VW. That's the viewport unit. So we have the VH, we have the VW, we have the VH, we have the Vmin, we have the Vmax. So they commonly used are the first two, the VW and the VH. So the VW means that 1% of the viewport's width. So what viewport means is that the visible area. So what you can see at a particular point. So right now, our viewport on this PowerPoint slide is actually everything you can see on this screen at this point. So from this top here to this very top, that's for the height, and then for the width is from the left to the right, the viewport. So if I scroll, okay, this screen is quite unscrollable. I can't scroll it because we have fixed content here. So I will take it back to to my web document. Again, the viewport is what we can see right now on the screen, the visible area. If I can scroll this web page at this point, right? I mean, the point that if this CSS measurement units can go out of the viewport, or if I can make this CSS units to disappear, right? It means that it is not within the viewport. All right, so let me take it back to the code. What I'm going to do is I will go back to index.html and see the element that can increase the height. Look at this header here, right? We go back to styles.css, and then say, so another relative unit, the viewport, VH, that's the viewport height, and then we also have the VW, as the viewport width. Great. So I want to select the header there, this header right here. So the first thing I will do is just to give it some styles, I will select the header and then set the background. So remember linear gradients for creating smooth transition between multiple colors, right? So linear gradients, I'm going to pass red and yellow. So let's see what's going on here. Okay, great. So this is actually the portion for header. Now, if I want to increase the height of the header to take 50% of my viewport height, right? That means I will have to head back to my code and say on this header, I want the height to be 50 VH. All right, so 50 VH means 50% of the viewport height. Now, if I take it back to the browser and refresh, so you see, so it means that this background portion here is equivalent to 50% of my viewport height. If I make it 100%, if I set it to 100, on 100, save, and then back browser and refresh. So you see the three sections that has black border, they are no longer within the viewport because the header is now occupying 100% of our viewport. If I just scroll a little bit, look at it here. Now I can see the other section. So viewport is basically the visible area at a particular point. So at this point, the viewport is what we have from this top here to this bottom, and then for the width is from the left to the right. All right, so you can play around with the value, but what you should understand is that if you set the value to 20, it means that 20% of the viewport. So it now makes sense if I take it back to the HTML document. Look at this meta tag here. Meta tag here has the name attributes of viewport, right? And the content says that was width equals to device dash width. Means that if you are using an iPhone 14 or 15 or 16 or whatever device you're using, what this meta tag is doing is that it will ensure that the height of the element, the height of the device is equals to the width, not height. I'm so sorry. The width of the device is equals to the width of the viewport. So that way it will ensure that our content fits in the width of that device. So viewport again is the visible area. So width is set from the left to the right, that is the horizontal axis. So styles again. So this is for height. I'm going to maintain the 100. So 100% viewport. Great. Then for the width, So I'm going to say, so for instance, if I say 80 VW, so this means that I want the width to take 80% of my viewport width. So if I refresh now, so it means that this white portion here, right, is not actually part of the viewport because of the 80% that I actually set on that element. So the element now is not taking 80%. Actually, we have 100%, right? But the actual header now is now taking 80% width of our viewport. If I set to 50, it's going to take half of the screen width. So 50, so exactly half of the screen. So great, we have this. So this is how we use VH and VW in our designs.